Hey everyone, so it's time for the 3-monthly wrap-up. I don't know what that was, where I am going to review all these books that I read in the last 3 months. First of all, thank you so much to all of you who have subscribed. At the time of making this video, the channel has 240 subscribers and over 11,000 views and 500 watch hours. To those who are interested, you need to have 4,000 watch hours and 1,000 subscribers to actually make any money on YouTube. If I get to that point, I'll definitely be swimming around in all those 1-cent pieces. I just wanted to explain my rating system on Goodreads. Basically, I give 3 stars to anything as a base. From there, if it's a book that I think I would like to read again, I'll give it 4 stars. And very, very few books do I actually give 5 stars to. I reserve that for the things that I really, really love. 2 stars I'll give to things that have flaws, basically. And 1 star is just to warn other people that this is a really crap book. In my opinion, of course. I've said before, my reading can be a bit eclectic. These last 3 months is kind of eclectic. That's why I always put chapters in my videos so that you can skip ahead if you're not interested in anything. Definitely next 3 months, I'm going to be doing very much more sci-fi and fantasy. So, first book I finished this month was A Beautifully Foolish Endeavour by Hank Green. Now, this is the sequel to An Absolutely Remarkable Thing, also by Hank Green. I think I should just talk about this. I gave this one 4 stars. I thought it was very clever. It was a real page turner. He kept adding mystery upon mystery that you wanted to find out about. For those who don't know about it, basically it's set in the present day. Some alien statues suddenly appear on Earth, and the main character is the first one to make a video of this, and the video goes viral. So she has to deal with this instant fame of going viral and the consequences of that, and I think it's dealt with really well. Obviously, this is written by Hank Green, who is one of the Vlog brothers, who is obviously no stranger to having very popular videos. I have had a bit of experience with this, with certain things going popular and the consequences of that. So it was very interesting to me how that was written about. And so I really love this book. This one, I give it 3 stars. I feel a bit harsh in doing that, but I think it reflects my feelings. In this one, there's this kind of fortune-telling book device, which I thought was cool. There's some VR stuff, which was cool, but has kind of been done before. And for a lot of the book, I thought, there's not a heck of a lot actually happening. I was thinking, can we just get on with it? There are a couple of places in the book also where things like power and society were talked about, and it seemed very cursory and hand-wavy. And the end felt like a bit of a mess, like it had gone through several rewrites. At times it was unclear who was narrating because the characters didn't have distinctive voices, and their actions sometimes seemed ad hoc. And most importantly, without giving away the ending, I don't feel I can adequately explain actually what happened and why things ended up the way they do, which is not ideal. So in the end, the lack of a good ending kind of spoilt it for me. And the quote on the back of the book, such a beautiful exploration of what humans can accomplish. I don't think it really delivered on that quote. So I'm happy to have read it. My daughter loved it, but I'm not interested in reading it again, so that's why it only gets 3 stars instead of 4 stars. Next up, no, I did not read the entire Bible, and I am not Catholic. I read the Apocrypha. So in the morning while I'm eating breakfast, I usually read the Bible or some sort of adjacent book, like a Tim Keller or John Lennox or C.S. Lewis, something like that. Currently, I'm reading the Archaeological Study Bible, which is very cool. It has all sorts of maps and archaeological stuff in there, like particular inscriptions that have been found about places. There's all cool sorts of diagrams, like this is the Temple Mount in the time of Jesus. Information about the places that get mentioned, like that's Corinth, where the letter to the Corinthians. All sorts of cool stuff. Anyway, I decided to read the Apocrypha, which are basically the books that you won't find in most Bibles that aren't Catholic. Basically, they're books from the Old Testament that don't have any Hebrew versions of them. So that's why the Hebrew Bible rejected them, and basically they became less and less included in English Bibles through the years. So, what did I give it? I gave it 3 stars. It was interesting to read. There was some stuff between the Old and New Testament, and then there's some extra books. I mean, they were okay, but I can see why they weren't considered really worthy of being included in the Bible. I'm not sure I'd bother reading it again, but yeah, it was interesting, so 3 stars. Next up, Live and Let Die, James Bond by Ian Fleming. So I'm not really going to go into detail about this. You can watch the movie. Basically, James Bond's in America and there's a whole bunch of voodoo stuff. And the books feel quite different to the movies. In the movies, James Bond just knows how to do things without even reading instruction manuals. Whereas in the book, he's spending a week building up his swimming strength and he's learning all sorts of things like spear fishing. And he spends a lot of time in diners and restaurants and motels and hotels eating and drinking. And he's always sweating and nervous, which is so not the movies. And in this one, he almost seems like a bystander at the climax. He just gets lucky. There's one curious thing. I found myself Googling a lot while reading this because there were all these references to things in the 1940s and 50s. For example, on the first page, he talks about the plane landing at Idlewild Airport. And I'm like, what is that? And I looked it up, and it's actually the name of JFK outside New York, because it was renamed in the 1960s. He also talks about a lot of places, so I was using Google Maps a lot, and now I know quite a lot about Jamaica. I guess this was exciting when it was first published, but it seems kind of dull now. I don't mind having read it, but I wouldn't read it again, so 3 stars. Next up, The City and the Stars by Arthur C. Clarke. This is set 1 billion years in the future, and I guess Arthur C. Clarke was examining, like, if humanity is going to be around in 1 billion years, it must have found some way of being stable without destroying itself. And so he comes up with the idea that these people don't want to explore anymore, that they've kind of had that stamped out of them, that there's no drive. And of course, the protagonist is the first one to come along in some time that actually has this drive to go and explore things and the consequences of that. This is actually an expansion of a short story he wrote called Against the Fall of Night. I think this one was better than the original short story. It's better developed. Obviously, that's what he was trying to do. But it's still interesting to read the original short story and this one. If you're going to read one, you may as well read the other as well. This is an example where sci-fi can sometimes be amazing. Within the first few pages, he's basically describing this MMORPG that the main character is part of. And this was written in 1957 or something. It's pretty incredible. I mean, this is before there's VR. This is before even Dungeons and Dragons was invented. And there's another bit in the book where basically the guy's using Google Maps or Google Earth to kind of zoom around and look at this city. Essentially, it's kind of a mystery novel where more and more things get revealed, which I enjoy. There are perhaps some unanswered things at the end, which can be a little bit unsatisfying. And there are parts that go perhaps a bit long. But overall, it's a great book, so I give it 4 out of 5. Next up is Taran Wanderer by Lloyd Alexander. Now, this is part of a 5-book series called The Chronicles of Prydain. This is the 4th book. The second one and kind of the first one were made into a movie called The Black Cauldron by Disney. It's an animated movie. They're kind of based on Welsh mythology, but I don't know Welsh mythology, so what? So that kind of doesn't mean anything to me. Anyway, the first 3 books are more quest-based. This one is a bit different because it's basically about Taran, who is the main character of all these books, going on a search for himself because he's an orphan, as you often are in these books, and he wants to find out who he is, like who his father was, who his mother was. So thus commences a bunch of vignettes, basically Taran wandering around and meeting various people and learning various truths. It's not exactly a humorous book, but it is funny. Some of the characters are over-the-top ridiculous. Some of his companions are very funny, but Taran is always serious. There are some surprising twists and a very satisfying ending. Ultimately, Taran is heroic in that sense of, I would hope to be able to act in the same way as that person. He deals with loss and giving things up by choice. He learns about despair and how he disappoints himself, but also how to find the joy in life. This is a very solid 4 stars for me. One last thing, rating the maps. Now, all these editions do not have maps. Why must you torture me? But other editions do have maps, and there's this great website online with all the various maps. So I think these are the US editions. So this is the one for Taran Wanderer. Now, I like maps. This is not a great map. This is a 2-star map. What is going on with these squiggles here? Yes, it kind of has all the locations that the characters visit, but if you look at it compared to the other maps for the other books, it's just a mess. And then there's the UK versions, which it's, it looks nicer. But again, it shows the parts where the characters went, and when you've read the other books, it's kind of like, what, where, what? Yeah, so, hey, it's a map. I like maps, so it gets points for that, but I can only give this 2 out of 5. And I burst out laughing when I read this on page 162. White thatched roof cottages sparkled in shafts of sunlight. If you don't know why that's funny, just search up Trogdor. Alright, White Nights by Dostoyevsky. This is the first book by Dostoyevsky I've ever read. One of the reviewers on Goodreads say they recommend this book to people who have never read Dostoyevsky, and this will determine whether they like the rest of his works. I really hope that's not the case, because I didn't enjoy this one very much. I mean, I didn't hate it, I just wasn't wowed by it. It's basically a story about unrequited love. The way the characters speak to each other is very formal, and I'm not sure if that's due to the translation or because this was written in the 1800s. And that's odd, because the prose certainly doesn't come across in that kind of old stuffy way. Some of it was actually really good. There's this scene where he's anthropomorphizing the buildings that he's walking by, which was really cool. Ultimately, I think I just didn't like the characters. They're idiots. Also included in this edition was a short story called Bobok, which was a fun idea. Basically, this person goes to sleep in a cemetery and hears all the people that are buried talking amongst themselves. There were probably too many characters for such a short story, but it was kind of humorous. So overall, I give this 3 stars. Okay, Famous 5 on a Hike Together. This is book number 10, or as I like to call it, Famous 5 and the Quest for Food. Most important statistic, time to ginger beer, 11 pages. But that's only because it starts with a rare bit of George and Anne at their school. The food in this is quite ridiculous at times. For a big hiking trip, they pack cookies and chocolate. Then they stop in a shop along the way, and for that day's food, they order 8 sandwiches each. At first I thought they must mean some smaller form of sandwich, but then it goes on to explain how the lady uses 64 slices of bread. When they stop for lunch, they have 5 each. Then the next morning, they have this smash-up breakfast of porridge, cream, golden syrup, eggs, bacon, mushrooms, toast, marmalade, and coffee. There's even a bit where some of their food gets stolen, so they go and steal some back. Anyway, there's also some hiking involved, and there's sunken treasure and baddies, and everything turns out all right in the end. Oh, there weren't any caves, but at least there was a dark cellar. This edition seems to be the original text because the kids wear blazers and the word queer is used a lot, which is taken out in later editions. And look at that cover. That cover is peak 80s styling. The hair and the jumper is just great. I don't think there's a Famous 5 I haven't given 4 stars to, and this one gets 4 stars as well. Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. This one is often compared with 1984, which is obviously set in 1984. This one is set 600 years in the future. Sci-fi is often about changing one thing and then examining the ramifications of that. In this case, it's everyone is born via test tube, so there are no parents, there's no fathers, no mothers, there's no family unit. And so Aldous Huxley examines what would be the ramifications of that to society. And the book introduces you wonderfully to this concept because it's a tour group that's going through the test tube factory, and you're gradually introduced to the concepts and how society looks on things that we regard as normal as like, oh, that's ridiculous. Why would this society be like that? And then you gradually branch off because there are various workers in the test tube factory that become the main characters. So it's a very clever way of introducing the book. Later on, there is a kind of savage reservation, what they call savages, and one of those comes to society. So it's examining that person's perspective coming in contact with civilization and kind of trying to grapple with how this society works, and it's so different to what he's used to. The last part of the book is kind of interesting but also depressing. I kind of feel like Huxley didn't know where to take the idea. In some ways it kind of made sense, but it just wasn't satisfying. I'm giving it 4 stars because it is a classic and I do feel like it would benefit from a reread. I mean, it's only 200 pages, so I think it's worthwhile for most people to read this book. It is pretty cool. Norse Mythology by Neil Gaiman. I happened to be at the library and had a quick look at the graphic novels section. I have read The Sandman by Neil Gaiman, and so I'm always interested in anything he's written, and so I just picked this up. So apparently he wrote a book called Norse Mythology, which does retellings of the actual Norse myths, not the Thor of Marvel comics. And this is an adaptation of that novel, or at least the first part of that novel. It's basically 6 issues, 6 different stories. The first few were really good. The others were like, whatever. So I'm just giving it 3 stars. It was fine. No desire to read it again. Next up, Are Your Lights On by Jerry Weinberg and Donald Gause. No, this is not a fiction book. I'm a software developer who has to deal with clients, and sometimes it's important to know that what people are asking for is actually not probably the best thing to give them. There's usually something better that you can build them, and the trick is helping them to understand that without making them feel dumb. Anyway, this book is about that kind of thing. It's full of ways to think about problem solving, even figuring out whether the problem is worth solving in the first place. There's a great statement: a problem is a difference between things as desired and things as perceived. So sometimes it's about changing people's perceptions and then the problem actually disappears. This is a very quick read. It's the kind of book that deserves to be read like multiple times because it's got so much good stuff in it. This is my second time reading it and I can definitely see myself reading it in the future. It is a 5-star book. All right, The Great Hunt by Robert Jordan. I thoroughly enjoyed this book, just like the first one. I give it 4 out of 5. I'm going to be doing a more extensive review of this in another video, so check that out. Next up, House of Blades by Will Wight. I'm gonna put a picture there because this is difficult to hold. So midway through The Great Hunt, I took a little detour and started this book, which is the first book of the Traveller's Gate trilogy. If you're unaware, Will Wight is a very successful self-published author. He has been on the New York Times bestseller list. He's best known for a series called Cradle. It's known as progression fantasy because the main character starts out kind of this low-level character and kind of gains levels like in a role-playing game. Anyway, he just published the last book in the Cradle series, and as a celebration he released all his books for free on Kindle for 24 hours. So of course I snapped them up. I haven't read any of them, so I thought I'd give his first ever book a go. I read the first 2 chapters and yikes, I was not impressed. After coming from Robert Jordan's amazing prose where you know exactly what's going on, reading this was like, ooh, this is bad. Just kind of clunky. But I knew it was his first book, and Andrew Watson said the actual House of Blades part was quite cool, so I decided to continue. And yeah, there's this section in the middle, there's this House of Blades, and it's kind of really cool. It's like the TARDIS, it's kind of this alternate dimension. It works in this interesting way, and it's fun and enjoyable watching Simon explore this crazy house. Unfortunately, that's about the best positive part. The main characters are not really all that likable. The main character is just kind of pathetic and whiny. There's this mentor that talks to these creepy dolls. There's this other character called Alan who seems like a bit of a knob. Probably the most interesting character is this girl called Leah who is not what she seems. So the writing's a bit clunky. The characters aren't very believable. The main characters are annoying. And the plotting is a bit random. There are some places where I thought, wait a second, what's going on here? And I did a search on Kindle and it was like, no, I haven't missed anything. There's just this random character has shown up and is acting in this weird way. The other thing is the book is kind of boring. It takes 90 pages to get to this House of Blades, and I'm just thinking, wow, this is a drag. Basically what this book is missing is an editor. So I'm giving it 2 stars. I don't feel too bad in giving it 2 stars because I watched an interview with the author. He wrote this when he was completing his Masters in Fine Arts, and he realized, hey, I better write a novel. It's probably going to be bad, but I just need to get one out there. So he wrote this. So I don't feel too bad in saying that it's not that great. He obviously improved in future, and I am going to continue reading the series. There are 3 books in the series, and then there's another book which is a bunch of short stories. So I will continue reading. Hopefully it gets better. And lastly, I read a short story by Ted Chiang called What's Expected of Us. Ted Chiang wrote the book that the movie Arrival is based on, which I haven't seen, but it looks interesting. This is the first of anything I have read of his, and it was fantastic. It's a very short story, basically about free will. It reminded me of the best of Asimov's short stories. You take one idea and you see what the ramifications of that would be to society, and then you end it with a great line, and you make the reader think, and you do it all in like 3 or 4 pages. It's really great. So I highly recommend you read it. It'll only take you like 5 minutes. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. So let me know in the comments whether you've read any of these books and what you thought of them, and I will see you in the next video. See you.